This video is about global EV sales projections, and this is based on an analyst report that came out yesterday from Piper Sandler by Alex Potter, which made the news here because it says basically that by 2040 EVs will rule the world. And there are interesting points here making that this is all good for Tesla and for some of the other automakers like the legacy automakers, but it's bad news for NIO and other Chinese EV. So we'll look at this report and comment on the numbers and give you my personal projections actually that are made for the Chinese market, for the global market, and of course NIO in specific. But before I'm gonna do that, I wanna ask you to please smash the like button, so that helps with the YouTube algorithm, and also please make sure to subscribe to the channel and also hit this tiny notification bell that whenever I make a new video you will actually get a notification and don't miss any of the insights. So let's jump into the report and the news about it. Potter is predicting that in 19 years the EV takeover will be complete, and that interestingly Volkswagen, not Tesla, will be kind of the leader here with 9.2 million EVs sold by 2040, whereas Tesla will have around 10% market share and selling 8.2 million vehicles per year. So Alex Potter, he's a Tesla bull. He has a price target of more than $1,200 per share. He previously appeared on Rob Mauer's Tesla Daily podcast. So I'm also referring to Tesla Daily here for this analyst report because I actually don't have this report myself. And personally, I also think that Tesla Daily is possibly the best source out there for commentary and news around Tesla. So as you can see, these are the numbers by the analyst report. They're projecting that Volkswagen will be leading with around 11 million sold by 2030. The Tesla numbers will be around 9.3 million sold at the highest. They are peaking and getting lower over time. And for NIO, they project 690,000 cars by 2030 and 790,000 by 2035. For the total sales, they expect a peak by 2030 of around 99 million cars being sold. Now, the first number that I would like to question critically here is Volkswagen's, because I do think that yes, Volkswagen is doing a great job at actually transitioning to EVs. So they have announced many new electric cars, but so far they are mostly ICE cars being converted to electric cars. Nowadays we see the first models being launched like the ID.3, the ID.4 and so on, that are based on a new platform and that are built electric vehicles from the ground up, but still lacking some of the most anticipated functions like in the car, turning the car into a digital computer in terms of having good software, having smooth over-the-air software updates and so on. But yesterday there was an interesting report for a reality check for Volkswagen, particularly in China, because the electric cars that are starting to sell there having actually sluggish sales. So they sold 1,213 cars of the ID.4 and that was actually 200 units less than they sold in April. And this in turn even meant that they needed to dial down on the production plans for the ID.4. And the reason for it is simple. Unlike Tesla models and a growing number of vehicles from Chinese electric car makers like XPeng and NIO, the ID.4 cannot park itself. It doesn't have advanced self-driving features and nothing like, for instance, NIO's Nomic advanced voice-controlled functions. Now, I do think that Volkswagen will be able to catch up with such functionality over time. Tesla and NIO, I think, have around 3 to 5 years each in Vorsprung, so actually they are ahead here with those capabilities, and that will give them now a better jump start into the Chinese consumer world, because frankly the Chinese consumer is not very loyal, and if they see a better deal elsewhere, meaning maybe on the specs, on the functionality, but particularly on the price, then they will go somewhere else. So I do think Volkswagen has a realistic chance of catching up with this, and they're working on it, and they are the boldest of the legacy manufacturer to actually go into the EV world. And I do think, yes, most of their customers will actually adopt it as well. But you can see with those sluggish sales in the beginning that they lack this EV brand and also, some of the product features at the moment. So it will give them a hard time in the beginning. Also, the sales network, notably here, didn't want to take on those cars, and that's something which is a problem because the dealerships are really big in China, and for Volkswagen in total, they don't have the direct sales model. So as long as the dealers see that the cars cannot compete in the environment government, for instance, in China, they are unlikely to buy the cars from Volkswagen, frankly. And so Volkswagen may want to use some power here in order to push those vehicles into the markets. And for instance, in Europe, we've seen the news that Volkswagen were selling some of the cars, the electric cars, to the dealers at first, but not yet to the consumer. But that still counts as a sale for Volkswagen there. But ultimately, of course, they need the consumer adoption as well. So bottom line here, I do think I will transition successfully to EVs, but whether or not they can actually keep their market share at those high volumes, I'm not quite certain about that. So personally, I'm not so quite convinced about this take here of having VW Group growing and also General Motors and so on. Another issue I have is about the global sales. In total, they are peaking at around 99 million here. I personally have different expectations towards this. I think they're simply not acknowledging what's going on in China and that the Chinese passenger car sales will continue to grow much more than that. And I'm basing my numbers on the automotive logistics report here for global vehicle demand forecast 2020 to 2030, which I deem quite plausible here. In general, they outlined that till 2030, the actual unit sales will hit 120 million. And as you can see here, the green part is Europe, which will remain quite flat. Also, the US might be just normal and flat, but where the growth is coming from is the red part here. This is China, which will make up around 40 million in sales by 2030, according to them. As well as a little bit more growth coming even from the Asia-Pacific region. And this kind of aligns with other data, for instance, from Statista, which projects 110 million vehicle sales already by 2025. And also undermined by reports, for instance, from the Society of Automotive Engineering of China, that the country's car sales by 2030 will be around 38 million. So I know there are other reports that are also saying that the car sales will actually peak at around 100 million. But personally, I am in the camp that Chinese sales numbers will drive the global car sales so far that we don't peak at 100 million, instead go straight to the 120 million like projected in the numbers that I've just shown. In my market estimations that I have done for my NIO business case, where I have modeled the number from 2020 to 2030 as well. By the way, this Excel sheet is available to all of my patrons. I am continuously updating those numbers whenever I have new insights. I'm also modeling the business assumptions for NIO as well as the revenue projections and a little valuation sheet there. So if you're interested in that, please consider become one of the patrons, and then you can download it and see for yourself whether or not you find these assumptions realistic or not. To give you some perspective, I also modeled, for instance, the China passenger car sales here, and also used actual numbers for 2020 and actually have also dated them back for the last 10 years in order to see how they have historically grown, and then projected this one forward for 2021, for instance, assuming 25 million. I think there are actually estimations out there that they will be closer to 27. So you see, actually my numbers might be a bit conservative here, and I end up with 34 million being sold by 2030 in China, and that is lower than the numbers and the other models that I've just shown you, but these are the basis for my personal market estimations here. I went on and also modeled electric vehicle numbers here, so 1.4 million been sold in 2020, so that's roughly 6% market share of EVs from the total passenger car sales in China. I think this year there will be around 2.3 million electric cars being sold, so that's a year-over-year growth rate of around 60%. And I think this growth rate will actually be continuing, and so we should see an adoption of 50% of all cars being sold that will be electric by 2026. According to my estimations, that will be 15 million electric cars being sold, and this will continue to actually an 85% adoption rate by 2020-30, and that will be close to 30 million vehicles being sold electric only in China. So once again, these numbers are even a little bit more conservative than the other sources that I've shown you, but they're clearly different to this Piper Sandler report, which I think totally has a blind spot in what is happening in China. So let's have a look at the NIO sales and estimates in the Piper Sandler report that they will peak out at around 780,000 cars, right? So in 2020, NIO sold around 43,000 cars. I think this year they could hit around 95,000 cars. and actually do project that by 2025 there will be more than 1 million cars. And if you think of it, NIO will actually have the capacity to do so, and it's just based on the Hefei agreement, which you can see there are plans that NIO will do a star market IPO later on. And if you look at the Hefei agreement, once again, they have laid out how many models they want to build, how the sales numbers should be, so they are clearly aiming for 1 million there. And now with the NIO Park, they will actually have the capacity with NIO Park alone, plus with the factory on top that they are currently have with the JAC partnership. So I think it's just not out of this world that NIO will be able to produce 1 million cars. Of course, the question mark is whether or not the product will be good enough for the consumers to adopt them. But I clearly think they are and will be. And if we do just some sanity check here, that would mean that in China, NIO would be selling around 800,000 cars. So these are the China sales. And for global sales, I am predicting that they might do 300,000 cars by 2025. So that's not actually a big number for a company like NIO with a premium brand, with a very convincing product already today, just selling 300,000 cars globally. They're now entering, in this year, they're entering Norway, where I predict they could sell roughly 4,000 cars. Scaling that to 300,000 is not out of the world in my point of view. And this would actually translate into roughly 7% of market share for all of the Chinese EVs being sold, and 1% of the market share of all electric vehicles being sold by 2025. Think about it, this is not much, it's just 1% of global EV market share and 7% in the Chinese market. So already today NIO has around 4% of the Chinese EV market share, and I think that will be actually growing, and there are not too many EV players around that can sell globally so far, so I think it's realistic to grow to just 1% market share globally for NIO. For the Chinese market segment, I even went so far to look into pricing categories. So looking in the splits, so 25% of the vehicles sold are less than 80,000 RMB in sales price, and NIO usually is around the 250,000 to 600,000 RMB price range, in which 7% to 3% of the cars being sold by 2020. These numbers are based on McKinsey numbers. And I've projected that these higher revenue segments will grow from just 10% to almost 20% of the market size in China by 2030. Because think about it, China is still in transition just from a third world country to becoming a wealthy middle class and even having now the most billionaires in the world. But I think there's still just a lot of transition going on in the second tier, in the third tier and the fourth tier cities. Lots of economic growth to come in the next years in China. So if you look in this relevant NIO premium segment, NIO has now a 1.4% market share in the segment of around 3 million cars being sold in the segment today. Most of the cars being sold today in the segment are obviously ICE cars and sold by Mercedes, by BMW, by Audi and so on. And I think NIO can well grow into the segment, particularly in China, because I think there is a trend towards buying homebrew startups and companies, and NIO is poised to gather more than 20% in market share of this premium segment in my views. In total, there will be 8.9 million premium cars being sold by 2030 in my point of view in China, and I think NIO can capture 22% of that. So by 2030, I project that NIO could sell up to 2 million cars in China, still resulting in 7% of a market share of all EVs sold in China, and could sell up to 1.4 million cars globally. That would result in 3.5 million cars being sold by NIO in total. And this is somewhat of a bullish scenario of where NIO could be. Of course, this would require them to build more, maybe even local factories in Europe, or maybe partnering with another manufacturer. Maybe they continue in this partnership model. But I'm just modeling this here from a top-down market perspective in order what I think is the total accessible market, what I think is actually the premium market and so on, and where I think NIO can actually, with the brand and with the products that they have, go in perspectively. So for the 2030 numbers, of course, there is lots of uncertainty around that. So the 3.5 million cars by NIO by 2030 are, of course, ambitious, and they require that they also, for instance, have lower tier segment cars, which they, I think, will bring out to the mass market in the future as well. But this also gives you some perspective, for instance, with the lower numbers of the roughly 700,000 that the analyst of Piper Sanders gives, to what I think is possible in the future. Possibly the truth will be somewhere in the middle, but that would still be more than 1 million cars by NIO, maybe closer to 2 million cars annually produced. And as we know, for NIO, the cars are ultimately only kind of the install base for the whole ecosystem. So the cars are not even the most important part for NIO's business case here. And if you're interested in that, how I value and model the revenue streams according to this, then once again I invite you to become a patron. I'm now scheduling a deep walkthrough to my business model here that I'm showing you now with those projections on the market side, but obviously have more estimations regarding the revenue streams according to this and so on. And I will take some time with the patrons to walk through this on all those numbers and projections. Maybe at some point also make a couple of videos about that in the future here on the channel. But anyways, that's what I can offer for now. I hope you find those insights interesting. If so, then please leave a comment and a like. And then thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next one.